Like, I kind of wanted to throw my iPad in the garbage. It was bad. Hi, I'm Carly with Bookish Pixie Reads. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you stopping by. If you're new and you haven't been here before, please like and subscribe and follow along for all my videos. But today I'm doing my January wrap-up of all the books that I read for January 2023. So I thought I had a good month. It wasn't like my best month. I was doing, I have a friend who's having twins, and I was knitting blankets, and I've learned that I can knit and I can read at the same time, but both go slower. So things that I would have read much faster, I read a lot slower just because of the nature of the things, but still, here we are. I do, if you're new here, I kind of do like an analytics just for my own kind of knowledge, but also in case anybody finds it interesting. And so I read 6 books by 6 different authors. 2 were physical books and 4 were digital books. Of those 6 authors, 3 were male, 3 were female. And I also do like a racial breakdown, and I was very bad, and all my authors were white. I'm trying to diversify my authors, my racial and ethnicities of my authors, but they were all white this month. And I read one author who identifies as LGBTQIA. So that's where we are. And also, the way that I've been doing things is that I talk about my favorite books first, my least favorite books last, and then kind of the stuff that fell in the middle at the end. Just because I have less to say. I don't have as strong feelings either way. They're just kind of meh. And then I have a book that's kind of a bonus book, but it's not being counted in this list, and I'll explain that later. But so my favorite book of the month, it's been probably my favorite book that I've read in a really long time. I'm like, is it my favorite book of 2023 and it's only January? Who knows? We'll have to see. But enough of that. It's Lavender House by Lev A.C. Rosen. He's written a couple other things. There's a couple YA things he's done, a couple of like fantasy things. He seems to be kind of dipping his toes in a lot of different genres, but he also uses different names, different variations of that name. Like some is just Lev Rosen, so forth and so on. You can look him up on Goodreads, you'll see his stuff. But so did Lavender House. I loved this book so much. I got it from the library as a digital copy. I loved it so much that I promptly picked up a physical copy so I could own it. It's the first of a series, of a new series. I'm not sure. It's called Andy Mills. It's a mystery. This is a mystery story. And the detective is Andy Mills. As a genre of like where this falls in the mystery universe of genres, is that it sort of feels a bit like Golden Age detective kind of story mixed with a little bit of noir. Like it's a bit more violent than like a standard Agatha Christie sort of story, but it's kind of got that manor house. It's that manor house mystery, but in San Francisco in the 1950s. It's kind of got both of those things going on. But so this is early 1950s San Francisco, and Detective Andy Mills, he just got fired from the San Francisco Police Department after being found doing homosexual deeds in the bathroom of a gay club by fellow police officers, and they promptly kick him off of the police force. And he's contemplating his life and what will he do now, and because his life was kind of wrapped up into his work, and so he's really kind of contemplating on what to do with his life. And he's in this bar, and it's very like the blonde walks into the bar, but it's not quite that, but it had the vibes of the like she walked in and I could see the the lights flickering in the black and white noir situation happening. But this woman comes in and she knows who he is, and she's looking specifically for him, and she's like, what's her name? This woman Pearl. She's the one that walks into this bar, and she wants to hire him to solve this case, and she wants to hire him because he's gay. And she believes that her wife was killed, and he's just like, I'm sorry, your wife? And so we get into this idea, this story, that this woman, Irene, she is the owner, matriarch, whatever, of this very famous soap company, and like bars of soap. And she scents them, and she has like 4 scents, and lavender is the most famous of these scents. And she dibbles and dabbles and specializes in that. Well, she created this house in this estate on the outskirts of San Francisco. It's this manor house, quote unquote, surrounded by gardens, surrounded by a wall, surrounded sort of by a fence. Like, it's a very walled in estate. And they call it Lavender House because of the lavender of her soap, but also because, if you didn't know, lavender, the color lavender, is also associated with LGBTQ people. They have lavender marriages, which is when, like, especially like in Hollywood, but a gay person would marry a straight person to hide their sexuality from coverage from paparazzi or, you know, the media, the tabloids, and so forth and so on. And that would be called a lavender marriage. But so lavender has been associated as that color. So the house kind of has that double meaning. It's the lavender, the scent of the soap, and the lavender because the house is full of gay people. So we find out Irene's gay. She's married to, I already forgot this woman's name, Pearl. She's married to Pearl. And to the public-facing audience, Pearl pretends to be like her social secretary, so she can be out with her, but because Irene's a very famous person or a very like business person, she can have a social secretary. Irene had a son, and he's gay. He is in a not a lavender marriage, in a sort of bearded marriage with a lesbian woman, legally. Her name is Margot. His name is Henry. And they live there. Henry's actual boyfriend lives there. His name is Cliff. And Margot's actual girlfriend, who is bi, Elsie, frequents. The staff is gay, and the only straight person who lives in this house is Margot's mother, because she has nowhere else to go, so they let her in. And they kind of are one big, quote-unquote, happy family. So, pre-story, Irene dies over a balcony in the house. Pearl is very convinced that she was murdered. Everyone else is not. And so she needs, and it happened like 3 weeks pre-story. And Andy's like, why did you only come to me now? And she's like, well, you only just got fired. Because she's like, I need someone gay. Because she's like, and this was, I thought was so interesting. Because she's like, I can't go to the police. Because if the police come investigating around our house and discover, like, they'll figure out our secret. That's their job. They'll figure out that we're all gay. And we will go to prison. They will not take us serious. Like, A, they won't take us seriously, but B, then we will all go to prison. And then even if they don't figure it out, she's not family. So they're not going to take her seriously, and then they're not going to tell her anything, even if they find anything. So it's a whole bunch of, like, where she needs, like, a gay private detective, essentially, to look into this so they can find out, but not necessarily get in trouble. And the whole family thinks it was just an accident, except for Pearl, Irene's wife. And Andy kind of stays at their house, and he goes into the investigation. And I toyed with the idea that it happened outside the house. He does some investigating of that. But I thought this was such an interesting story. Because I can't get into tell you who did it, the how did it. This ticked, like, everything for me. I had heard about it, I had read about it, and then one of my best friends read it, and she loved it, and it was just like, I was waiting for it to come in at the library, and then I was just like, whoa. And because it had, like, meaning, and you learned about some stuff, but it also was a good fiction story, a good mystery story, and then it had, like, tenseness to it, but then you also might have had some lightness to it. It kind of, like, hit all these notes. And as historical fiction, I used to read so much historical fiction as a kid, and I didn't like purposely go away from it, but I noticed I hadn't, over the past however many years, I hadn't really read as much of it anymore. And I don't know, I just thought I got tired of it. Like, how much World War II historical fiction can I read? How much prairie fiction can I read? And I've been loving, I've read recently the Vera Kelly series, which is historical fiction, and she's either bi or lesbian, which I've adored. And this I adored. And I have something else I'm reading for February that's 1950s queer San Francisco as well. And I'm like, is this my new favorite genre? Because it takes the stories you kind of already know, the time periods you think you already know, and you get to hear about it from this like different perspective than from what we standardly get. Because they also talk about that, like, this is 7, 8 years after World War II. So a lot of the men in the story served. And they talk about what it was like to have served in the war as a gay man. And surprisingly, and like this dude's got like author notes in the back of this book, like this was clearly very well researched. He talks about the books that he got his sources from, so I don't think he like just made this up, but that it was surprisingly much more open than we are led to believe from gay men in the military who were serving during World War II. And it was that they weren't like they weren't boyfriends, people weren't monogamous. But because they all thought, because it was the war, it was World War II, it was terrible, people all kind of thought they were going to die, everybody kind of had a live and let live situation. And once they kind of came to the conclusion that they were going to win the war, is when everything turned around and got more strict. And then rules in society got a little, like, way stricter. Like, women couldn't go around in, like, pants. Like, you might get arrested if the women were dressed too masculine. And some of that I knew and some of that I didn't, but because this is solely focused, for almost every character in this is gay, you totally get immersed into what that must have been like. And of course the gay house manor house thing probably did not happen, but it's still like a really interesting story. But yeah, it's the first in the series. The second one comes out, I believe, in October of this year. It's called A Bell in the Fog, I think. They set up the sequel, I think, because I was like reading this, and I'm like, oh, how's this gonna go? It's a detective, he'll just solve more mysteries. But I think they've set up for the future really well. No, I just sort of loved this. Like, I loved this. And I kind of hope everyone else loves it too, because I just loved it so much. Like, I haven't like felt so much for a book in such a long time. Even books that I've given 5 stars, because I'm like, oh yeah, I loved this. This was great. But I'm like, I loved this. I never go and buy books immediately after. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to add about the remarkableness that was this book. Oh, I do need to say. Because I said, oh, it's kind of like a cozy mystery, but there is violence. Like, it does feel like it's trying to be accurate to the LGBT experience in that time period. So, like, you get homophobic slurs, you get violence against LGBT people. And this book is written by a man that identifies as gay. Like, so it's not like it's straight people writing gay violence. So trigger warnings for that. Like, if that's gonna bother you, skip it. But homophobic slurs, homophobic violence. Also, there's some suicidal ideation. And then it's a murder mystery, so people get murdered, be ready for that. But so I give this, if you haven't got it, I give this 5 stars. I bought it, I love it. I'm going to rave about it forever. I love this. The next book I'm going to talk about is Camp Creepy. It's the 3rd book in the Sinister Summer series. I've talked about the first 2 in another video. I will link them down below. It's by Kiersten White. It's middle grade fiction, kind of adventure-y, kind of adventure / mystery, little bit of fantasy dropped in kind of story. And they have the vibe of like series of unfortunate events mixed with Scooby-Doo. Like the Adventure of the Week Scooby-Doo episodes. So I feel like I I always feel like I have to talk about the previous stories to make this make sense, but these 3 kids, twins, 12-year-old twins, Theodora, and her brother Alexander, they're twins. Their 16-year-old sister Wilhelmina get basically dropped off by their parents over the summer with an aunt they've never met, with no explanation given, and the parents disappear. We don't hear from them ever again. And then basically the kids are sent on like sort of missions to like, for vague, very vague tasks that everybody sort of acknowledges as vague. And in the first, and kind of, they're all like, what's happened to our parents? That is the through thread of the series, is what has happened to our parents, what are our parents doing? But the first book, is the Wretched Water Park, and the kids are dropped off at a gothic themed water park. They have to they have to complete a task. They solve a mystery while at it. The second book, they go to the Sanguans. The second book is called Vampiric Vacation. They go to a Sanguan spa that is very kind of vampire, Dracula themed situation. Solve a mystery, new task. Story progresses, like the overarching story progresses. And in this book, picks up immediately after that one leaves off, where they found something in the end of the last book that says, like, I think we need to go to this camp. There's a summer camp that I think we need to go to. I think we're going to find some information there. And what was great about this, because I felt like the kids chose this place. The aunt was like, oh man, I don't know if y'all are ready for that yet. But the kids are showing some agency, and they go to this summer camp, and it is shockingly like normal. Everyone's in tie-dye. Nothing nefarious seems to be going on. All the counselors talk with exclamation points, and it's literally written where everything the counselors say, oh, I'm so glad you're here! Exclamation point. Like, everything is super, and she even asks, Theo's like, why do y'all talk with exclamation points in the end? Like, we don't do that! And she's like, okay! Like, it's this whole bit of, like, everyone is super over the top cheery. And they get almost put off by how normal everything is. It's too normal, it's too cheery. It becomes too monogamous. Like, it almost, that's not the right word, but it becomes too, like, the tie-dye causes, like, everything to blend into each other. Like, you can't almost identify children, like, kids next to each other, because everybody's blending in with each other. And I reread the description of the book today, because I was like, I don't know what to say that's going to, because the Wretched Water Park is a scary water park, and that's sort of what it is. The Vampiric Vacation, it's pretty obvious by the title, and it's not quite obvious by this title what is actually going on, and so they don't say in the description what the thing is here, and so I don't want to say it, I don't want to spoil it, but as an adult, it's pretty obvious what's happening. I always say with these books, I would love to have a conversation with, like, the age group that this is directed toward. And, like, what are they getting out of it versus what am I getting out of it? Because there's humor that I get that I don't know if they would get. There's stuff that their older sister is telling them, or, like, trying to converse with her eyes. And I'm like, I got it. But I don't know if, like, the 12-year-old's getting it. Because the stories is completely told through the eyes of the twins, the 12-year-old twins. And also, and the problem, because I've really liked these books. The first one I loved, the second one I was like, and the third one I'm kind of back at loving again, and I'm a little concerned for the fourth, because the second one relies too heavy on Dracula. The first and the third kind of have their own individual, like, new stories, and the fourth book, they're going to go to, I think, a science camp, but it's like Dr. Frank and Mr. Stein, and we're clearly going to be doing Frankenstein. And I'm like, is it going to be too hung up on that? So we'll see. But the books do that Babysitter's Club thing where they have to, like, the first two chapters are almost exactly the same in every single book, right? the first quarter or so of the book is kind of, it's giving you new information. It's not like you can just skip the chapters. You are getting new information dropped in. But a lot of it is, in case you pick up this book off the shelf and you haven't read the other two, it's getting you caught up that you can understand what's going on. And you're like, And these books are coming out 4 months apart. Like, I remembered I don't need this. But also, I get it. It's also for 12-year-olds. Like, I get it. But, you know, it's there. It's a thing. So it takes a while for the story to pick up, get going. But once it does, like, there's a lot of new information that I thought came out of this. Because, series of unfortunate events. I stopped after book 3, book 4. For me, because I read those when I was maybe in my early mid-20s. That's when they came out. I'm like, they're all just the same. And I don't know how they end because I didn't finish it. But every book is, the kids get stuck with Olaf in a scary costume. The adults can't see it. They can blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, does it ever, like, move beyond this story? And I think this could have easily gone that way. And maybe it does. I don't know how many books are going to be in the series. I don't know if the upcoming fourth is the last. I haven't found any interviews or any information that say either way. But because we kind of have that where we have a scary person, we have a scary kind of adult, and the kids have to like solve the mystery, and the kids have to get away from the scary adult. Like, you have that. But the overarching mystery of of the parents, that they've been really progressing that. And I was wondering if we were just gonna kind of like solve that in the last 2 pages of the last book and whatever, but it really seems like that is the story, and we're learning lots of new information. And the way this book ended, the first 2 books end very similarly, and this book ends, I would say, half similarly and half different, and I won't say to spoil it, but it got me really excited for the 4th book. And what I've mentioned about the 2nd book is that these books are really lovely with their diversity and their gentle diversity, because I feel like they talk about, there's some LGBT characters that are sort of mentioned. Like, there are parents that are maybe LGBT that we don't meet, but someone just says, oh, I have 2 dads. You find out people are like different racial things, but they're never really brought up. Like, it's brought up to describe them and then never really mentioned again. And whether or not that's good or bad, but like, these things aren't mentioned. But the real thing that's been like, in the first book, I'm like, oh, these kids have like, they have anxieties. I know, but like, don't we all? But in the 2nd book, I really picked up on, I think Theo has ADHD and Alexander has like severe anxiety. And they talk about that, and they don't really put names to that, but the kids, you get their point of view and you feel it and you see it. And so I think, like, if you have a kid that goes through that or suffers with that, that could be a great way for them to read and maybe relate to it and have conversations without that being the story, because that is not the story. And this one kind of goes more into that, where they each have kind of their issues and having to conquer those feelings to get things done to help each sibling. And they talk a little bit about, each child feels this without talking to each other about it, that they feel that what they consider to be a problem or like a defect, does their family not love them? Do the people that they love not love them, because is loving them a burden because of what they perceive to be a problem? And then of course they learn that, like, no, we love you because of the way you are, not in spite of the way you are. And so I think, like, there's a lot of conversations, or even just like, hey, read this. This is a fun, creepy summer camp story. And then you kind of get that stuff shoved in. But I really kind of like this overarching, because there's like fantasy. There's actually some questions answered. It's just interesting. Without spoiling it, I thought this one was interesting, and I just really love the way the story has progressed in its overarching plot line. But so I'm giving this 4.25 stars. So my next book I'm going to talk about is The Bookshop of Dust and Dreams by Mindy Thompson. I think it might be her first book. So I think I found out about this through like one of my Facebook book club groups I'm in. Someone mentioned that it was nice, and it's also middle grade. and I thought it sounded interesting. Let me read you what the Goodreads thing says. I don't need to read you what the thing says. But essentially, this family runs a magical bookshop. And it's 1944, New York. And not New York City. It's like kind of like a smaller town. Maybe like 45 minutes by bus ride or something like that. But it's a ways away from New York City. But her family, Poppy's our lead character. Oh, I don't think quite looks like this illustration in my head. But Poppy's family owns a magical bookstore. It's sort of like a time-traveling bookstore. It's very interesting in concept. Where I think regular people can just come in. Like, the bookshop stands in 1944 on a New York street, and I think people can just come in. Come in the front door. But people from any time period, 100 years before or after where the present day is, people can come in. And it sort of shows up if you need it. If something is going on in your life and you need it, the bookshop kind of like appears. You walk through into this bookshop. And once you've been in, you get a coin. And anytime you want to come back, you just sort of rub the coin or whatever. And then the bookshop appears and you can go in. And there's all sorts of rules about the books that are there. And like the children of this family aren't allowed to read books that are published post the time period they're in. Even though they're at the bookshop. And I don't know how they don't explain truly how they stop customers from getting to these books. The bookshop also has feelings. Like, if it's sad, the walls get kind of dark. If it's feeling happy, they're like yellow and sunny. And there's like a lemon tree inside, and the plants, like, when it's happy, they grow flowers, and when it's sad, the leaves fall. And so it's very an emotive bookstore. And it's also part of a network of similar bookstores. And it's sort of run by a government. Like, it has a council that makes rules and judgments about these bookstores and inspectors. And there's like an apprentice girl who runs between where these traveling bookstores are to deliver correspondence and mail. And to keep this time traveling aspect, like, the family can only use the back door. That keeps them in the present day. They're forbidden to use the front door. So that's sort of the world we're in. And so, but we're also in the world of World War II. And at the very beginning of the story, we find out that her older brother, what is his name? I took notes because this book has kind of a lot going on. There's a shockingly lot going on. Her brother, she has a younger brother. We don't really need to worry about him. He's not like a key player. But her older brother, Al, has a best friend named Carl. And he's sort of like a brother as well. Pre-story, Carl gets enlisted. And into World War II, Al can't because he has asthma. And we find out, like, it's literally almost one of the first things that happens is that Carl died in the war. And the rest of the story hinges on that. And Al is they're all devastated because he grew up in their house, and he didn't like grow up in a house, but he was but he was always in their house. He had nicknames for her. He was truly like a brother to her. And he dies, and her brother Al is beyond devastated, and he's having severe survivor's guilt, and he wants to use the magic of the bookstore to save him. And that is against the rules. The people who run the bookstores are not allowed to use the magic of the bookstores for really any reason. And he wants to use it. He wants Poppy's help to use it. And she, like, adores the bookstore. Like, according to the bookstore rules, the bookstore will be handed down to her older brother. But she's the one who wants it. She has the connection to it she has the bigger connection to it. And so she's like, I can't break the bookstore rules, but also have this loyalty to my brother. And she's like, well, of course I'm going to bring him back. And you keep hearing, like, if you do this, the darkness will come, but we don't know what the darkness will. And her brother keeps getting, like, worse and worse. And he's having, like, these mental And while this is happening, her father is sick. And as a 30-something-year-old woman, when I read this, the second the father coughed in the first 5 pages, I was like, oh no. Because if you don't tell me a person's coughing in a book, if it's not going to be an oh no, right? Her father gets very, very sick. And, like, hospitalized sick at some point. The people in the bookstore who've always been very friendly from different time periods, they all know each other. They're always there. They get very testy with each other. Like, all of this anger and frustration is, like, coming out in the bookstore. The bookstore physically is feeling it. The people in the bookstore are feeling it. It's a whole bunch of stuff. And we finally figure out the brother's been using the bookstore for evil. Well, not evil. He wants to do good, but it's not working out. And she feels that now she has to, like, can I fix it? Because she's not using it. I think she's kind of just like, I'm not going to use it for my own good. I'm using it for, like, the universe's good. And blah, 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 blah. Story, you know, I can't tell you a bunch more, but it's a lot. Like, I was surprised. This is only... This is 324 pages long, and this has got a whole world-building universe in this. I was like, this, it's not listed as a series. It's kind of, there's nothing, the author on Goodreads doesn't have anything else listed coming up in the future, but I feel like this, it perfectly stands alone. It does not need to be a series. It perfectly stands alone. But I feel like it could be a series. I don't know exactly how, just because, but I think, like, the bookstore universe of what's happening here is a really good idea. And it's got the time travel stuff into it. But, so, my feelings on the book is that, so I actually started it a little bit before Christmas. And I mentioned earlier I was doing a bunch of crafts for Christmas and a little bit post-Christmas. So it took me a minute to get into it. It's taking me a while to read everything because I'm crafting, but also I had trouble getting into it. I can't remember at what point I was like, oh wow, okay, yeah, I'm in. And I was like, oh, this is interesting, but okay. And then I get in, I'm a sucker for time travel. It's a really interesting time travel concept. But I will say, like, because this is middle grade fiction, 8 to 12, you know, depending on what how your reader is. But this is dealing with a lot, and I think it kind of depends on your child. Okay, so I didn't write it down. But I think it depends on your child. Like, World War II. Young people dying in World War II. At some point, because it's time travel, we go to World War II, and you get battles and stuff like that. And it felt not overly harsh. Oh Lord, my kitty cat's sleeping over there and he keeps making adorable noises. That's very cute. You got World War II, you have a chronically ill father. But also just the grief of losing someone in a war. Like, the story is very much about the grief of losing someone in a war. And like, survivor's guilt, and, like, there's nothing inappropriate, there's nothing, like, sexy, or I don't think there's any, like, curse words or anything. It's not like that, but it's just, if your kid had, like, a parent die, maybe we don't read this. But it could also be just a good book to, like, teach a kid about the war and conversations about war and all that sort of thing. When's it okay to break rule? I mean, that's anything. But yeah, I just remember going like, whoa, this felt big and wide in its scope. But also, like, it felt like it was darker in a real way. Like, not in a fantastical way where, like, you know, there's a mythical war that we're fighting, but not very real. This is a real war with real things and real people affected kind of going on for kind of the middle, at least the middle grade that I've been reading recently. So in the end, I gave this 4 stars. Like I said, I thought it had a slow beginning, but once it got going, I was like, okay, yeah, we're into this. So I'm giving that one 4 stars. Alright, so my next book I'm going to talk about is The Villa by Rachel Hawkins. So this is kind of, I think, just debuted in January. I got this as an ARC from NetGalley and St. Martin's Press. So thank you, St. Martin's Press and NetGalley, for the digital copy of digital ARC of this book. This book made me angry. So I think it kind of just maybe... Alright, we'll start at the beginning. So what the book's about. It kind of is a dual timeline thing, which in general is a thing I hate. Well, I hate the kind of stories that are... You okay? So I hate the kind of stories where a woman's husband dies or divorces or whatever, and then she inherits a house on the coast of the Cape, and she goes, and then she finds in the trunk or behind the picture frame or whatever a stash of letters, and she's reading the letters, and as she's reading the letters, we're getting that story and that time period in the past, and that story is always significantly more interesting than Lady in the Cabin, which is like self-insert fanfic from a lady who wants to live in a cabin on the coast, by the author. And then in the end, we find out she's really like the great-granddaughter of this woman in like the cabin that she rented on the coast. Like, you know what I'm talking about. Generally, when I pick those up and I read the description, I go, oh no, and I put them back because I'm at a point where I hate those. I always find the past story much more interesting than the present story. And we all know they pretend that they won't be intertwined. They're always intertwined. I could not give a flying flip anymore. Like, I actually want to I always toy with the idea of writing one just to see if I could do it, because it seems like someone wrote a story in the past, but it would maybe make a novella, and then the editor's like, add a present day storyline and intertwine them, and then you've got a full-fledged book. Like, it always feels like kind of lazy writing to me. And that's just mine. The Villa kind of has that going on, but not really. They did it in a way that made me not hate it. So the story is about this woman named Emily in our present day time period. She is going through a divorce from her husband. They had a good marriage until she kind of fell ill. The husband didn't want to take care of her. She's got an inkling, no actual evidence, but like a feeling he's cheating on her. She's an author of cozy mysteries, like the self-insert fanfic cozy mysteries, and she kind of almost says it's self-insert fanfic, like it's fanfic of your own life. I find like the modern day cozy mysteries, when it's a lighthouse or it's a bookstore and they're set in modern day, I'm like, that is self-insert fanfic of your own life. That's how I view them. I read them, I do, but that is how I view them. And did I say self-insert of the author's life? Now, like, wouldn't this be nice if I could bake and own a bakery on the coast of Scotland, and then they write a cozy mystery series about it? Like, that's what they are. Like, all the leads are always the same, blah, blah, blah. She writes a cozy mystery series like that. Basically, the boyfriend in her series is basically her boyfriend. Her boyfriend become husband. She says that, and so she has a hard time continuing to write the series because she has to write this man that she now like hates as a continually loving boyfriend. So she's kind of over it. She's due, like, she has to have another one come up. She's like past her deadline. It's a whole thing. She has this best friend, Chess, and who's like Jessica, and then went Jess, and then went Chess. Like, that's her name now. And it's sort of a self-help hippy-dippy guru now, who is super famous. Like, started writing a column for a thing, wrote a particular column that blew up, and now she has her own career writing these books, have sold millions of copies, has like an actual, like, has actual money, has an actual career, blah, blah, blah. Emily sort of opens the book with, do you hate your best friend? And it's sort of like, when she thinks about her, sometimes when they're not hanging out, like, oh my god, she's so annoying. But then they hang out and she's like, oh yes, this is why I love her. Well, Chess suggests, like, why don't we spend the summer at this villa? I rented this villa in Italy. You should come. It's like the small town villa in Italy. It's very, I haven't read it, but I read another book by her and she mentions it. The Under the Tuscan Sun book. It's very, let's go get a villa and boost our lives in this villa in this small town in Italy. And she tells her the name of the villa. Emily Googles it. And she's like, this murder villa? You want me to stay in this murder villa? So our second storyline is that in the 70s, it's kind of playing on the Sharon Tate murders in the 70s. The Manson who killed, Charles Manson, who had all that murdering happening. It's kind of toying with that. That there was this London crew of people, an aspiring rock star, his girlfriend, who's the point of view we get of the story, Mary, her sister, this like actual kind of rock star, pop star, whatever, they go stay in this villa. And we know from the beginning that like somebody gets murdered in this house. And to the point, like, this is like a known enough story in the universe of this book. Like it, they talk about, like, there are podcasts and like people talk about it, and podcasts about it, true crime shows that are about it, articles have been written about it. And Mary, the girlfriend, so they don't tell us for a while who was murdered in this house, but we know Mary survives because Mary sort of becomes a famous horror novelist. After this incident that happens, and she's like 19 or so when this happens, she writes a horror novel that becomes like blows up, and then she never writes anything else again. She's sort of an enigma. And so the second storyline we're getting is their story up into the fact that they move into this house, this villa for the summer. She's got this boyfriend. They kind of have an open relationship. He kind of hooked up with her stepsister once, maybe more than once. They go to this villa. There's all this sexual tension with the rock star. It's kind of got a lot going. It's doing all that. And the story kind of jumps back and forth from Emily and her story in Italy and Mary and Crew's story from the 70s in the same house. And which I will say is that the reason that it made the dual storyline better for me was because Emily always knew what she was getting into. It wasn't like a surprise where she's like, you know, and then in the end, oh, this is the house where all this happened. Like, we always knew. It's Googleable. It was always there. Also, the book kind of reminded me of, like, it felt like it was trying to be a lot of things. Because I was like, oh, it was this commentary on cozy mysteries, but that's really only the first chapter, and I really wish we would have leaned more into that because I read cozy mysteries. It also kind of felt like it was trying to be like an oral history, but not quite. Like, not an oral history. Like, but I haven't read Daisy Jones and the Six, but I know that's an oral history. But I read the final revival of Opal and Nev, which I loved. Is an oral history, and in between the interviews with the people, you get kind of like articles and whatnot. And they do that. You get excerpts of like an interview from a podcast, and you get Wikipedia entries, and you get like that are filling in murder villa story. And this is just sort of PR'd as like gothic thing. It's not. I also didn't really find it thrilling or anything else, but it's more my thoughts. But so Emily at the house finds writings like that Mary had written and hidden in the house, and Emily decides, this is what I'm gonna write. Like, screw that cozy mystery I was gonna write that I don't want to. I'm gonna write a nonfiction piece relating this house and what happened, and relating it to this horror novel that she finally read. There was a copy in the house. She read it, and she was like finding the correlations between the stories. And then drama happens. I won't tell you what, because then that spoils the story, but drama. So I've never read Rachel Hawkins. I've never read any of Rachel Hawkins. And so I didn't really know what to expect. And I'll say, while reading it, like, I was page turning. I wanted to know what happened. I was interested. I was intrigued. But I also was like, I'm not sure I'm the audience for this. Like, this is not my standard read. It's not thrilling enough. I just, it's doing the Tool storyline that I don't love, but it's okay. Like, I don't hate it. Because the Mary 70 storyline was significantly more interesting than Emily's storyline. And her toxic friendship with Chess. But I will say I was put off by on, like, page 1. Because on page 1, they're giving us this, like, Wikipedia entry, article, zine, whatever, about Mary. And they talk about how when Mary wrote this horror story and she broke out onto the horror scene, that she was the one woman to do that. It was the time period of the creepy house, the house with the circle, Amityville Horror. It was the time Amityville Horror had come out as a book, The Exorcist had come out as a book, there was something else at the same time that had come out, and she was the one female to, like, break that glass ceiling. And I'm like, does Shirley Jackson just not exist? And I Googled it, because I've not read Shirley Jackson, I just know of Shirley Jackson, and she wrote Haunting of Hill House, that the thing on Netflix was based off of. Like, she's got a ton. It wasn't like, oh, she wrote one and was never heard from again. She's got a ton of horror books, and she's considered, like, one of the best horror novelists, right? And, well, horror writers, I should say. And for this to just pretend that Shirley Jackson doesn't exist, to make Mary the female that broke the glass ceiling of horror writing, kind of ticked me off. So I was already kind of turned off before I even started. But okay. If we blow that off, I was like, okay, I'm in, whatever. But I'm like, And, like, by the time I got towards the end, I was like, this is like a 3. And I think mostly a 3 because I'm not sure it's for me. Like, there was nothing really particularly wrong with it. It was just, it was okay. And then the end. And I'm going to put a spoiler warning on here. I'm just going to tell you this ending made me angry. Like, made me furious and made me going to drop this whole rating down to 2 stars, right? It's made me that angry. Like, I kind of wanted to throw my iPad in the garbage. It was bad. So I'm going to do a spoiler. I won't tell you literally what happens, but we get, unreliable narrator, which I hate. I hate unreliable narrator, and it just kind of ruined the whole story for me, and I was sort of over it and done. End of spoiler. But yeah, so no, just the end made me kind of furious, and from what I was reading, people were like, oh, I like Rachel, people who like Rachel Hawkins seem to like it. So if you like Rachel Hawkins, you'll probably like this. But this was not for me. So I'm giving it 3 until it made me angry, then a 2 because it made me angry in a way that I did not want to be angry. Hey you guys, so I was editing this video and I realized that the villa made me so angry that I forgot to tell you certain things about it. So this is like a PS to the villa review. So I mentioned already that in the book they show you get like clips of a podcast talking about the murders that happened at the villa in the 70s and magazine articles about it, and that this is a known thing. Emily Googled the house and was like, this is a murder house, this is a known thing. So one of the problems I had with the book was that I was supposed to believe that Emily is the first person to discover the connection between the horror novel that Mary wrote and this house. Like, in this day and age of true crime, internet detectives, online detectives, and message boards, somebody would have gotten this Airbnb of a house ages ago, would have found all this out, and would have already had a true crime documentary about it. Like, I just don't believe that Emily would be the first person to have figured this out. Being that this is a known entity the book that Mary wrote is famous, somebody would have made those connections. And somebody would have just went to this house to be like, I'm gonna go to the murder house, and then do selfie videos, and somebody would have figured it out. And I found that to be a little bit of a reach, being that we're putting all this other stuff in it. If we had done the traditional, like, she was the one to figure it out, then yeah, sure, okay, but she's not. And then, okay, so I forgot to do trigger warnings. We're told there's a murder in the house, so a murder in the house. I think there's drug use. I think there's like standard 70s drinking, alcohol use. I think we have a miscarriage. Child's death. Oh, and this was an interesting thing. Also, that like the way the book dealt with it is that Mary, 1970s Mary, and her sister are essentially, by present day United States law, granted this happened in England in the 70s, but present day United States law, these girls were sex trafficked by this guy they're with. And granted that she's in love with this guy, and it's told through her point of view, she doesn't see it that way. And it's not like it's brought up to her. No one's like, hey, hon, you were sex trafficked. But by our standards, she would have been sex trafficked. I mean, this guy's not super older than her. It's not like he's a 50-year-old, but he's older. They were underage. He got them out the country. And it's interesting because sometimes when you get situations in books like that, the authors want us to think this is a romantic relationship and doesn't really see the problems themselves. But in the podcast episode clip, somebody mentions it. Like, oh, you know, like, this is creepy. Yeah. So it's interesting that the author knows it. And so it's not like we're completely glamorizing and glorifying a problematic relationship. And so I thought that was cool. But it is there as also a trigger warning. And so I think that is the end of my PS of the villa. So sorry about the weird extra bit. So now, this one kind of crushes me a little bit. I'm going to talk about Now is Not the Time to Panic by Kevin Wilson. So Kevin Wilson wrote Nothing to See Here, which came out a few years ago. And I read it last year? Or 2021. Anyway, I read it relatively recently. And 2021. Read it 2021. And I loved it. Like, kind of got me I think I was kind of in a reading slump. Got me out of a reading slump. Like, kind of thought it was perfection. Was maybe my favorite book up until Lavender House. Like, it was the book I would recommend. If people were like, what should I read? I was like, you read this. And so I kind of went into this. Now is Not the Time to Panic is only my second Kevin Wilson book. And I kind of went into it not even knowing what it was about. It was just, I love the other one so much, I will read this. So the story is about, it's mid-90s, small town Tennessee, kind of where there was an industry that kind of faded out. So it's sort of just like this kind of poor town where all the kids move out of when they age up, and that kind of town. And she, mid-90s, so you got Frankie, who lives with her single mother. Her dad cheated on her mom, now has new wife, new kid, who gave the same name as her daughter. That's a whole thing. And her triplet older brothers, who were chaos incarnate. And it's summer vacay. I think she's about 16. At the local swimming pool, she meets this boy, Zeke. And he is sort of visiting his grandmother for the summer. He's kind of going through a similar situation where he found out his dad was cheating on his mom. His mom is from this small town, kind of picks up, moves there, is trying to figure out what to do. Do we forgive the dad? Do we divorce the dad? Blah, blah, blah. And so they sort of become friends. And they both have this, and the story is told completely through Frankie's point of view. And a lot of it's internal, like you feel her angst and you feel her, but a lot of it's like when you're that teenager and you don't feel like you fit in your body, and you don't really feel like you know what life is, and you don't know how you fit in, and you don't even feel like you fit in yourself. And they talk about how, like, what they want to be when they grow up, and she wants to be an author and he wants to be an artist. And they're like, what if we create art? Like, what if we do that this summer? Let's create art. And something that's like only just ours, and then we put it out into the world and see what happens. And so they create sort of this, she just creates a saying. It's just a saying of nonsense put together that sort of pops in her head, and she writes down, and he draws kind of cryptic drawings around it. And they have access to a photocopier. And they make hundreds and hundreds of photocopies. They hang them up all around the town. And because this is the late 90s, so this is post-Satanic Panic, but it's very reminiscent of like late stage, I don't know what late stage Satanic Panic was, but it's reminiscent of Satanic Panic, where people start going like, what is this? You get two kids who get in trouble, blame the posters. They make up a reason, and then so the whole town sort of goes nuts, and chaos happens, and no one knows it's these kids. They don't tell anyone, blah, blah, blah. But so the way the story opens is that present day Frankie gets a call from a journalist and was like, hey, was that you behind cryptic phrase? And she's like, I don't, and she kind of goes into like a spiral panic, and she sort of agrees to talk to her, and it kind of jumps from like, most of the story is the past, but you get her kind of like, do I talk to this woman? Blah, blah, blah. And it's coming of age story. These two kids who are very awkward around each other. She at some point says like, can I have sex without having sex? Like, I wish I could just have sex with them to get it over with, but like, I don't want to have actual sex with them. And just that kind of want to be seen and to be like felt that someone knows you for who you truly are. It's got a lot of that going on. And so here's what I felt about the book, is that I can't fault it for anything. You know what I mean? Like, I can't say anything's wrong with it. I can't say why it wasn't for me, because it wasn't for me. And I think I kind of felt like, kind of bored isn't the right word. I felt like I couldn't relate to it, which is weird, because like, I read Lavender House and adored that, and you know what I'm not gay. And I felt that I could relate to the characters in different ways, and I just felt like I've been a teenage girl. She's 4 years older than me. If we were to date the ages. And so I was like, oh. Because I remember, I think like in the villa, Emily's a couple years younger than me. Frankie's a couple years older than me. And so I was like, it's weird that I couldn't relate to it, really. I just couldn't connect to it. It's not even that I couldn't relate to it. I couldn't connect to it. I just couldn't. And I don't really know why. I thought about it a lot. I've had conversations with people about it, and I'm like, I just couldn't connect to it. Don't know why, but I also don't know to tell you, don't read it, because I don't know why I didn't connect to it, and I can't tell you that. Like, it felt real to the characters. Like, I got it. I do wish it ended. I wish it kind of kept going a little bit. Like, I wish it would have ended a little differently. Not that I dislike what happened in the story. I think it could have went on, but I was already feeling disconnected from it significantly before we got to that point. So I feel like objectively, like by going like, was there anything wrong with this book? Bada, 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 bada. I'm going to give it like a 4 stars, but like from a personal feeling on it, I'm going to give it a 3. So I'm not giving up on Kevin Wilson. I would like to go read his other, the Fang Family or whatever it's called, and I think he's got another one. I will probably go read those, but for some reason, I just couldn't connect to this, and I couldn't tell you why, man. So my last book that I'm counting is number 1 is Walking, My Life in the Movies and Other Diversions. It's by Steve Martin, and the drawings are by Harry Bliss. They put out a book. This came out like end of last year. I know Barnes & Noble and their like signed autographs Black Friday shenanigans. This was one they offered. I got it from the library. It's not signed. But they put out a pigeon, like a bird book. It was all illustrated, and it was just basically single panel like jokes that birds are saying. And this is similar, where it's all illustrated. It's just like comic panels. So number 1 is Walking, My Life in the Movies and Other Diversions. And Steve wrote it, Harry did all the comics for it, and it's a lot of it. So number 1, he's referencing when number 1 is Walking. He explains it in here, but it's basically your number on a call sheet. When you work on a movie, when you're in a movie, or even or crew on a movie, if you're on a set crew, I think. It's definitely cast, but I think crew gets it too, is that you get a call sheet. And you get the call sheet the night before for your next day, and it kind of lists all the people who are showing up to work that day, and what time you have to show up for, like to get your makeup and hair done, what time people have to be in the trailers to get in, what time like set crew to call is, and blah 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 blah. And the actors are numbered by kind of importance, by like what your how your name is, the order your names are going to be in the roll credits, right? And Steve's like, oh, when I first started acting, I was always like 3, 4, 5, whatever. And then I finally got number 1. And when you're on your way from the trailer, from the makeup trailer to set, a PA will be like, hey, number 1's walking. And everybody knows Steve's coming to set. And he's like, oh, I got to be number 1 is Walking. So number 1 is Walking, My Life in the Movies and Other Diversions. It's not what I would call a memoir. It's very clearly a humor book. It's anecdotes about movies he's been on. And they're not full-fledged, like, here's a memoir of my life and all these movies I've done. They're little funny stories that are a couple pages long. I also started this in, like, November, December, when I checked it out from the library, and put it down to read other stuff, put it back. Like, you could literally read this in a day. Like, it's quick. I just put it down and read other stuff. And then, but I will say, it is called My Life in the Movies and Other Diversions. The other diversions are the majority of this book. And when we talk about other diversions, it is literally just like one-line jokes. Here's a comic panel, here's a joke. Here's a comic panel, here's a joke. They're not connected. They're not connected in any way. And so I'm giving this a 3 because I wanted more of my life in the movies, right? Like, it was like, that's what I came to it for, was my life in the movies. I'm a Steve Martin fan, not like a hardcore stan or anything, but I like Steve Martin. And I enjoy the movies that I've seen of his. And I was just sort of like, oh, I thought this was going to be more movies and a little bit of diversions, not mostly diversions and a little bit of movies. So heads up about that. So it's getting a 3 stars, mainly on just sort of like what my expectations were. But it's like, it's fun, but it's also just like one-line jokes, What am I going to do with that? And they're not like jokes you can just tell people. They're not like, knock, knock, who's there? It's not like, oh, I'm going to go tell my friends this joke, because it only kind of works with the illustrations, So, that, 3 stars. And so, if you've been keeping count, I've covered my 6 books. And so now I'm going to talk about my bonus book. I'm not counting this. This is not going in my yearly titles. Because I don't want to call it a DNF. But I'm not going to rate it, because I feel like a rating would be unfair. But it's called The World of Urban Sketching, Celebrating the Evolution of Drawing and Painting on Location Around the Globe by Stephanie Bauer. And I got this as a NetGalley arc from Quarto Publishing Group / Quarry Books. Can't read my handwriting. So thank you to NetGalley Arc and Quarto Publishing Group / Quarry Books. This actually came out in November, end of November last year in 2022 was when it finally dropped. So urban sketching is when I live in New Orleans, you go and you sit in front of Jackson Square, and the St. Louis Cathedral is behind the square, and you sit and you get your notepad and your pens and pencils and watercolor and spend an hour and a half, and you quickly pull up a sketch. You draw up a sketch of Jackson Square and St. Louis Cathedral, right? Like, that's urban sketching in a nutshell. And I like the look of urban sketches, which is why I requested the art. I'm not an artist. That's like a thing I would love to be, but I can't fathom how to be. I should take a class, which is why I downloaded this, or I requested this book. And because it also said in the description, it would give like step-by-step on how to do that, on how to become an urban sketch artist, and that's kind of a lie. But so I tried reading it, and every page is basically well, they explain to you what urban sketching is in the world and sort of the fandom of urban sketching and the joint community that exists out there. And then it kind of goes into be like, here's an artist, and here are things they've drawn about this part of the world. And then they show you those pieces that they've drawn, and they kind of give you like a little bit of the inspo, like a sentence line of the inspiration. Drew this with a micron pen and water, blah, blah, blah. And that's literally the book. And that's very hard to read. And also NetGalley, you got to do better with your pictures. Like, it was like the words were clear, but the pictures were all digitally breaking up. And as an arc, like, it's hard to judge. And I'm not rating it because of that. That's not like I'm giving grace to the arc process and that, but it's hard to enjoy, even just to like flip through and enjoy the pictures. And eventually I just stopped reading it. I just went through and I looked at all the pictures and I was like, these are lovely illustrations. Like, they are. And if you're into that, but it's not like a coffee table book of illustrations. Like, each page has like little like 3 or 4 and the descriptions of them. And when they say, we're going to tell you step by step on how to draw, it's like, this guy took some watercolor and then he drew some lines, and then he filled that in with another watercolor. Like, it's not telling me if I wanted to go out in the street and draw something, it is not telling me how to draw something. It fully expects a more than basic knowledge of how to do art. And so I feel like I cannot rate this really at all because it would be inappropriate for me to rate it. But I also requested it and they got it, and so I feel like I should talk about it. So I think it's like, if you are already an artist and this is something you already have an interest in and have skill in, and it's something that maybe you would like to learn more about and see inspiration from other people, this would be great for you. But if you're just like a person who's like, cool, maybe this will show me how to do art, it will not show you how to do art. And it's kind of a waste of just looking at pictures because they're just small. It's sort of like just showing you, like, here are different artists in the world and their style types. And that's cool, but I think it's really meant for, like, people who are in that community of urban sketching already. And you have to know how to draw. Like, you can't just send me out in the wild after I've read this book and know what I'm doing, because I don't. And it doesn't really say that that's what it will do, but it does say it'll give me step-by-step stuff, and it doesn't, so. But so, unrated, but I skimmed through the book. I'm not counting it because I didn't really read it. But I skimmed through it enough to kind of get the gist, and I told you. But so that's my books for January. I'm glad you stopped by. Like, subscribe if you haven't, and sneak preview for February. I am currently reading How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix, so I'm going to talk about that. And yeah. I'm sorry, that got really weird. Yeah, so I'll see you later. Thanks for coming by. Bye.